trying to, thank you, trying to bring back nature. Because if you just look at these two pictures, I think you can immediately see which one has made an attempt at doing this and which one has not. These are actually two side-by-side backyards here in Glen Rock. And I think the contrast could not be more stark. So naturescaping is landscaping that puts nature first. I think you can also have comfort, you can have access, you can have ease of use, and you can have beauty, but you can be paying attention to nature at the same time. So what does an ecosystem in its natural state look like? It's pretty crowded with plants for the most part. You're not going to see lawn grass. No lawn grasses are native. You're never going to see lawn. You're never going to see a monoculture. These are just two, I think I took both these pictures in Maine. There's just two examples of what an ecosystem in a fairly natural state looks like. The one on the left is a river. The one on the right is a wetland with a forest backing it up. And you can see the diversity of the plants in both of these landscapes. This is what we're aiming for. So what doesn't an ecosystem in its natural state look like? It doesn't look like large expanses of lawn, and it doesn't look like the same 5 or 6 exotic species planted everywhere you can look. I'm not going to dwell on this for too long, but this is what we are not aiming for when we're trying to restore the natural environment. I want to introduce you to a couple of important terms. When people who are talking about native plants and ecologists, they don't talk about planting zones the way gardeners do, zone 6, zone 7. That's pretty irrelevant for our purposes. What is relevant for our purposes is ecoregions. So plants tend to grow in communities, which means they grow in association with other species. If you see, for example, a red maple, you're not going to see growing underneath it. I'm trying to think of a plant that likes very dry conditions, because they're not going to grow together. Plants that like similar conditions are going to grow together in nature, and our goal is to put that back. So an ecoregion is an area where the ecosystem is generally similar. The map on the left shows you the very great complexity of New Jersey's ecoregions. You can see up here in the north, there's very complicated highlands of various types. There's a prong. This is actually where I live. There's a prong of lowlands here where you have a couple of areas with large swamps. The Great Swamp is in here. And then if you look at the bottom half of the state, it's all coastal plain. So it's almost like this should be part of New York, of New York or Pennsylvania, and this should be another state entirely. They were in colonial times. It should be another state entirely, because the ecosystems could not be more disparate from North Jersey and South Jersey. And I have to confess, I'm going to be talking mostly about ecosystems of North Jersey tonight. The plant community that's present in any place depends on the ecoregion, which depends in turn on the underlying geology. Also important to creating an ecoregion or similar associations of plants are, of course, the soil, the temperature, and the rainfall. Soil, of course, is a product of geology. So it sort of is all geology. One interesting thing in here, you probably can't see it, but if you look very closely, this is the line of glaciation. It's actually right here, and you can see it in the soils, and there's a big demarcation here. Where the last glaciation stopped, and then it goes off this way. New Jersey has very varied geology and many different ecoregions, and I do encourage you to play with this EPA website a little bit. It's very interesting. You can go down. You can start with big ecoregions and then go down to smaller and smaller ones, and then you can read descriptions of it. It's really quite interesting. I think Mike will have put that in the chat. So examples of some New Jersey plant communities. So this is a picture, I can't remember where I took this, but this is obviously a fairly wet forest, because you can see the ferns in the northern part of the state. It's a hardwood forest. This is a picture that I took in the Bass River State Park in the Pine Barrens region. So you can see the vegetation is quite different here from here. And this picture is of the grassland community at Cape May. So those are, you can see how just from these three pictures, how very varied the plant communities are, the ecoregions and the corresponding plant communities. And I have to admit, this is as much as I'm going to talk about the southern part of the state tonight. What I'm really going to focus on is the northern stuff, but you can find information on the southern part of the state. So the question is, how did we get from here? I just showed you this picture as a natural environment. How did we get from here to here? And how do we get back from here to something like this? How do we start to recreate these natural environments? How do we begin to recreate nature? So this is how you do it. I'm going to keep coming back to these two backyards because I think the contrast could not be more stark. If you want to go from this to something like this, and it doesn't happen overnight, but the first thing you do is you evaluate the site. You identify the existing vegetation, especially the mature trees. You develop a plan for removing the non-natives if you have to. You may have invasive plants. You may simply have garden plants that you realize you don't want anymore. So you need a plan to get rid of them. You need to make a list to do some research and discover what natives should be there. And your tall trees are going to tell you that. And then perhaps maybe you want to eliminate some lawn. I can tell you that 30 years ago, this was all lawn. This is my backyard, obviously. So I want to make sure I didn't. Yes. Okay. So how do you know what should be there when you're rewilding or you're naturescaping? You look at the terrain. That's sort of the big picture. If I'm going to visit a client and I realize that for the last quarter mile as I drive, I'm going uphill, I know it's going to be pretty dry up there. Conversely, if I'm going down all the way, I know it's going to be pretty wet down there. It's just, that's the way it goes. Water flows down. So that kind of thing will tell you, is it wet all the time? Is it dry all the time? Is your soil acid or alkaline? Is it wet or dry? Is it sand, silt, or clay? There are simple ways to determine all these things. Here in northern New Jersey, your soil is probably going to be just slightly acidic, and it's probably to some extent going to be sandy. But there also are pockets of other kinds of soil. In the Pine Barrens, it's as far as I know, it's pretty sandy. This is the site. Is it sunny or shady? And most important, and I really think that this is the biggest clue that you can have, identify the mature trees on the site or nearby, especially native trees that may be older than the house. Of course, it's always possible that the only trees around are Norway maples and they're not telling you anything. But if you go to, if you suddenly realize that you've got a great big red maple in your backyard and you never dawned on you before that that's what it is, it's a red maple, you know that your site is pretty wet because those are trees that like wet. Conversely, if you've got a sugar maple, it's probably pretty dry. If they're healthy, if they're big and they're doing well, they might even be the original trees that were there before the house. So these are all some of the things that you need to look into. I'm going to stop there after this preliminary information and see if there are any questions at this point. If not, I can go right on. That's no problem. But I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you very quickly and trying to give you a framework for thinking about things differently than you have in the past. I think of this when I was a kid. There was a Dr. Seuss book called On Beyond Zebra. And it's one of his books that is not sold anymore because there are things in it that we consider to be offensive to some people. But On Beyond Zebra, in other words, many of you are already interested in native plants. I want you to go beyond that. I want you, On Beyond Zebra was a book about 20 imaginary animals that go past zebra in the alphabet. So he made up 20 letters and 20 fantastic animals. I'm asking you to go beyond what you know about individual native plants. We're not going to be thinking in terms of individual plants. We're going to be thinking in terms of communities and what goes together. So questions, a couple of questions.
So Elaine, someone had asked at the very beginning about plant sociability index. Are you going to talk about that? Do you know where you could?
I'm not going to talk specifically about that. A good place to look into something like that is there's a book called Planting in the Post-Wild World.
Okay.
And I can pull it out and tell you the authors if you want, but that talks about it talks about planting, like prairie plantings for sort of how plants go together. So that might be a good place to start.
It's Thomas Rayner and Claudia
yes,
West.
that's the book. Thank you.
Awesome book. Really awesome
very,
book.
very good book. Yeah, she's a great speaker too.
Yeah, I've seen him too. So that's great. So it's
so that's a place where you might go to learn more about that.
Yeah, Rayner and Claudia West, Thomas Rayner and Claudia West. So there was you had the last slide and you list up. Somebody said, what was that on number 4?
There it is. Is that the one?
I'm assuming that's the case. So hopefully that answers Patricia's.
So terrain, soil, site, trees that are present, large trees that are present.
Okay. And then the other question is, in the slide, how do you know what should be there? Same slide. What to do if you have a combination of habitats around your home?
I think what I would do is I would plant for them both. So in other words, if you have a dry section and a wet section, or a sunny section and a shady section, almost everybody is going to have that. You need to look into plant communities for the different habitats.
Cool.
Yeah.
And that's it for the moment.
Okay. So I want to start with some examples of showing you that there are different ways to choose plants. When you're doing this kind of planting, when you're thinking in this way, you are not going to be going into the garden center and simply picking a plant because it's pretty. So let's start with a really simple example. I've got a dry, sunny site. I want a spring blooming tree with white flowers and berries for birds. And these are what I find in my local garden center. I find a Japanese weeping cherry, and I know I don't want that. Sorry, I went back. And I also find a flowering dogwood. Now, a flowering dogwood is a beautiful native tree, and it certainly has berries for birds. Migrating birds absolutely snap. I'm sorry about that. It's a new computer, and the touch is a little bit different than I expect it to be. If you look, but flowering dogwood, if you have a dry, sunny site or a sunny site, you don't want to plant a flowering dogwood. They are understory trees that absolutely will not do well in sun. What would be better for your site is a serviceberry, an amelanchier. There are several species, and there are even hybrids that work well, but you want to plant a serviceberry, and that has beautiful early spring flowers, which are almost too exquisite for words, I think, and fantastic berries in June. That the birds will snap up you get traffic jams when the serviceberries are ripening. So that's just a very simple example of picking the right native plant for the spot. Another example, I've got a partly shaded site, and I want an easy to grow shrub with red foliage. Now, what you're going to find in your garden center, you probably all know what this is. This is Japanese barberry. We can still sell it legally in New Jersey, although I hope that'll change soon, but you cannot sell it legally in most of the surrounding states. It is highly invasive. If you are a hiker, you have seen it in many places where you don't want to see it. And there are red foliage versions of it. I have to tell you, there are no native plants, pure species, that have red leaves all the time. It doesn't exist. But what you might find, there are cultivars of certain shrubs, like there are quite a few red-leaved ninebarks. The problem with that is that if you change foliage color, you also change foliage chemistry, and the insects that live on 9-bark will not be able to eat that plant anymore. So you are not doing a service to the environment. But what you can do, here's a beautiful, it'd probably take you some research to find this, but here's a beautiful native shrub. This is northern bush honeysuckle, Dyervilla lanicera. And the new foliage all through the year, from spring to fall, is red like that. And it's gorgeous. It's not terribly tall. It does spread somewhat aggressively once it's happy. It's a shrub of shade and poor soil. And I've got it growing where nothing would grow before. And the flowers makes yellow flowers for a very long season. And the native bees absolutely adore it. So this is, if you're willing to bend a little bit on your insistence on red foliage, you might find something like this. But again, this is going to take a little research. And that's what I'm sort of encouraging you to do. Another example, let's add some wildlife to the equation. I want to attract butterflies. This is more complicated than you think it is. If you go into your local garden center and you tell them that, you're very likely to be shown this. This is a butterfly bush, and the name is unfortunate, or Buddleia. This is a non-native shrub that will attract only adult butterflies for the month of August. And it does attract butterflies for that month of August. Their caterpillars cannot eat this because it's not native. It's only one species anyway. You may also get offered milkweed, because people know the association with milkweed. So that's not enough. That's 2 species. What you have to do, the reason I found this out, this particular one, is this is 9-bark, this flower. It blooms in May. And when this blooms, I have a hedge of this in my front yard. And when this blooms in May, it is covered with these butterflies. They're red admirals. So when I see a new butterfly in my garden, I look up what its host plant is. And I found out that the host plant for red admirals, here's their caterpillar, not pretty at all. Butterflies are lovely, but the caterpillars, as usual, not great. The host plant is nettles. Now, nobody wants nettles in their garden, although if you have a bigger garden than mine and you have, a nice moist spot where nothing else will grow, I would grow nettles if it were a place where, where people are not going to go because they can stick you. But what I realized is that about a block from my house, there is a stream, and all along that stream, there grow nettles. So the nettles are lush with foliage in the spring. The caterpillars are eating the nettles, and lo and behold, the butterflies arrive in my garden routinely in May when they emerge. So this is a little more complicated. You have to, what you're going to find is if you plant the native plants, the butterflies will come, but to find out the relationships is a little more complicated than just putting this in. Another one, this one is a little bit more complicated. This is a butterfly that has 2 generations, and each generation eats different things. So what I realized, this is red osier dogwood. And again, I have some tucked away in the back of my garden. My site is dry and it's in a shady spot. It's in the totally wrong spot, but I planted it 20 years ago and it's alive and it blooms, and that's all I care about. But I suddenly realized that in May, there were dozens of tiny, tiny butterflies flying out of the corner where these shrubs were. Now, this is a spring azure butterfly. It's less than an inch wide, with both wings. They fly very, very fast, and they almost never alight. But what I realized they were doing is they were flying. By the beginning of June, they were flying to the other side of my backyard where the New Jersey tea was just about to bloom. So what they were doing is the first generation, the caterpillars eat the flowering parts of dogwood, native dogwoods and viburnums. So they were in my red osier dogwood. The second generation, there's no more flowers there, but they eat the flowering parts of New Jersey tea. Again, I'm sorry about that. So so you have to have a variety of plants, and they're going to be serving a variety of needs. What about the birds? We all want to attract birds. To attract birds, you need insects. I think everybody knows about Doug Tallamy's work, his work with his graduate students, that shows that you have to have, by biomass, 70% native plants to feed one clutch of chickadees, tiny little birds. I have, again, I said I have this 9-bark hedgerow. And in the spring and early summer, there's also, I'm sorry about that. In the spring and early summer, there's also over here, there's serviceberry. And we realized that we were raising 2 different clutches of, oh my God, what are they? Somebody type it in there, because I had to go to Don Torino of Bergen Audubon to tell me what these were, but the name is escaping me. Oh, they're brown thrashers. I'm sorry. So brown thrashers, and here's the whole family. There's Mama and Papa feeding the baby with the serviceberries in June. So they have been there. They have raised that. Then they raised another clutch, and they fed it on the bugs and the berries from later on. So you need this diversity of native plants for birds. And again, putting back all these species is a way of restoring nature, of thinking in terms of nature. So these are just very few pictures of the wildlife that I see in my garden. This is the 8-spotted moth, and that's not the exact name, but it feeds only on Virginia creeper, its caterpillars, and I see them reliably every year. You will, these are milkweed bugs. This is, we have hawks that hang out in my neighbor's big tree and then come eat my bunnies, and I'm very happy about that. This is obviously is a Norway maple. It was a Norway maple. It's not there anymore, but there was a big dead branch, and it was a woodpecker condominium for many years. The branch was not over a place where people walk, so it was safe to leave this obviously dead branch with a lot of woodpecker holes in it. These are just all the different ways that you can attract nature to your site. Ecologists like to say, if you plant it, they will come, and that's true. So this is putting back what you need to create a habitat. And again, I'm going to stop for questions.
Okay, Elaine, now you're really stirring the pot here. Couple questions about stinging nettles. Are they deer resistant? And the other question related to that, and I don't know the common name, is Bommeria cylindrica. Is that a good substitute for stinging nettles?
I don't know. There are several subspecies of what we call stinging nettles, and it is Urtica dioeciae, something like that. And there is one subspecies that's native. I would not purposely plant stinging nettles in my garden, because the first time I ever saw one, I touched it. And believe me, it's not pleasant. So I didn't know what it was. I was hiking in Italy, in fact, and I didn't know what it was, and I touched it because I tend to touch plants. So, and it's really not pleasant. So I would not plant stinging nettles. But as I said, these are not on my property. I do, I'm a docent in an area where there are stinging nettles, and we keep the children well away from them. There are other plants in that family that will attract the same butterflies. It's often you're talking about plant families when you are talking about, or at least the genus genera, when you want to attract particular butterfly groups. You know, the fact that I think fritillaries eat violets, so they'll eat all fritillaries, eat all violets, as far as I know.
Right.
So, yeah, and so, go on.
I've got a bunch here. So, somebody has a 20-year-old Japanese lilac, and if they're like me, these plants have sentimental value. Do you chop them down and put natives in, or do you keep them and surround them with natives? Yeah,
it's a very hard call. It's a very, very hard call. I'm lucky because I basically had nothing but lawn when we were in our house almost 30 years, and there really was nothing but lawn. When we bought it, there was one dogwood tree that was in full sun and dying. So I planted around it. But yeah, that's hard. And all my trees were Norway maples. They're all gone now. I waited till they died. I waited till they died, and then I planted native trees. I certainly would plant natives around it. Yeah, I think if you have I mean, I wouldn't, if I had Japanese barberry, I think I'd yank it out. Because it's so invasive. I wouldn't plant, if I had miscanthus grass, which is becoming very invasive around here, I think I'd yank it out. I'd do everything possible to get rid of English ivy, because that really kills trees. If I possibly could, and certainly if it fruited, I would do everything possible. But I think one tree that is not known to be scary, invasive, I think I'd probably plant around it. But again, these are, depends on how many, also on how much property you have. And, if it's your only tree, you might want to get rid of it and plant something native. You've got a lot of other stuff.
So I think, so what you're saying is if it's something that is listed as invasive, and I know the list I go to is the Friends of Hopewell Valley.
That's what I use too. Photos, yes.
So
yes.
that was the Friends of Hopewell Valley strike team.
Yes.
And they have complete lists. They do monitoring, they do tracking, they do some eradication, they do some restoration now, I believe. But look at that list before you pull it out, because maybe it's something that's beloved. Like I have lavender that my best friend gave me, not native, but it plays happy in my yard. It's not going to harm anything.
It also is not an invasive plant.
Exactly. Exactly. So check the invasive plant list. If it is, then get rid of it. And barberry came up here. Is there a good replacement for that? If you were to replace barberry, is there something, Elaine, that you think is similar that would have a habit that would be similar to the Japanese barberry?
When I think of Japanese barberry, I just think of something that spreads out of control. So I'm not sure what a similar habit would be. It has small leaves. There's a lovely native shrub called coralberry, Symphora carpus orbiculatus, I think, and it has the main thing, it has these tiny little purple berries like beautyberry, but it's not beautyberry. And it does form a thicket, which is really nice for wildlife, but it also does, it will spread beyond where you want it to be. But it's a really nice, it's about the same height. It doesn't get more than about 3 feet, and it forms a nice thicket. That's a nice shrub if you want like the small leaves.
Right. So, and while we're talking about plants, let me just keep on this track. So you had featured a serviceberry earlier. Can you tell us about that serviceberry, and do they tend to be deer resistant?
Well, they are trees. So there are shrubs and trees. I certainly have deer. I have never had much problem with serviceberries, even the shrubs, with deer eating them. Most trees, when you first plant them and they're nice and tender, you want to protect them if you're in a deer area. But usually once they get woody and they grow up, you're pretty much okay. So I would not, deer have cultures. What deer eat where I live may not be what deer eat.
Right.
It probably isn't, in fact. So it's hard to say. All I can say is, for me, it's not a plant that they seem to like.
Yeah, and I have Aronia arbutifolia, so it doesn't seem to be attractive to the deer, even though lots of things around it are. So I have fencing, but I have not had them touch that, whether it's early spring when the leaves are just coming out, or now with the berries on it.
I haven't had much trouble with Aronia either. The one shrub that they adore, and this is something new, is New Jersey tea.
Yeah.
I had it for years. It did great. And then they discovered that they liked it. And now I have to protect them all.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the last thing, when you're trying to figure out what is my culture, what is the particularly the soil, builders tend to strip away when you go into developments, and so much of New Jersey are developments. Does this mean do a soil test and see what's left and work from there? Because it might be more difficult to determine by looking around what your culture is.
Yeah, it may not be what is in the neighboring yard. That's very true. I have worked in clients' properties where I stuck a trowel in the soil, and obviously this was not soil, it was fill. It was somebody had filled stuff, just filled in with rubble. So that can happen, but there are really tough plants that will grow even in that. So that's another question. That's a large question, but yeah, you want to know how well the soil drains. And if you're living in a place, you probably know that already
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
know whether your basement floods or not.
Yeah.
So seriously, you know that. It's really easy to determine if you have silt or sand or clay. You put some soil in a jar with some water, and you shake it up and you let it stand, and the layers are going to fall out, and you're going to see what's there. So you can look that up, soil composition test, and that's a pretty easy thing to do. You can test the pH of your soil in a pretty easy way. So all of these things are fairly easy to determine. And I am always in favor of planting for the soil you have rather than trying to amend your soil. There are many native plants that basically will grow in anything. They're just tough, and they'll grow. I mean, I call them the indomitables. When we moved here, I did not have the expertise that I have now, but I did know, because I had nothing but lawn, but when I dug, my soil was like beach sand. That's the only way to describe it. It ran through your fingers like beach sand. We're in a river valley here. We're in a floodplain. So it was just sand. Terrific drainage, that's great. But it was like sand. I've been planting. Some things didn't work, some things did. Now I know what would work there, or at the time I didn't. But now I have beautiful black loam, because the plants, for the most part, make the soil, not the other way around. So if you can start out with really tough plants that can grow in almost anything, in a few years, you'll have good soil.
Yeah.
That really is how it works.
So one more before you carry on. I know there are quite a few here. I think some we can answer directly. Somebody has a large shaded flat septic field. What would you plant there?
Shaded is hard. I have never had to plant a septic field. Now, shaded makes it more difficult, but there's a fabulous company that I bought my plants from for a long time, because there simply were no local native plant suppliers. There are now, thank God, but it's called Prairie Nursery, and it's in Wisconsin. And one of the things on their website is what to plant on a septic field. Now, it is sun, because it's Wisconsin, it's prairie, it's not forest. So I don't know offhand about that, but I would imagine you would want things that are fairly shallow rooted. But they do have, I would start with that, and you might find that there are things that would work there. And then I would just Google it. I really can't give you specific plants for shade and for septic fields.
Okay. All right. Well, carry on, Elaine. I'm sure we'll have questions at the end.
Okay. So how can you help create large, more complex ecosystems in your own backyard? And I'm going to talk about 3 different kinds of ecosystems. They are grassland, a red maple swamp, which is a forested wetland, and an upland forest, an oak-hickory forest. So we're going to talk about the components of these ecosystems and how you can start to recreate them. Grasslands. So I think these pictures might be both from West Virginia. Okay, so what is a grassland? A grassland is a temperate zone ecosystem, usually in an area that receives too little precipitation to support forest. I think most people here know that if you don't do anything in the east to a patch of land, you're going to have woody plants. You're going to have a forest eventually, and that's simply a factor of the amount of rainfall we get. We get more than 30 inches of rain, therefore our ecosystem can support large trees. And if you leave anything in the east alone, in most cases, you're going to get a forest. In areas with enough precipitation. So our, if you think about the prairies, the Great Plains, those are areas with much lower rainfall than we get. And the grassland was the end product of the ecosystem, of the evolution of the ecosystem. The right word is not coming to me. But in areas like this one where we live, we may have temporary grasslands that result from storms or from fires or from floods. In other words, you suddenly have a flooding event and the trees die, and then some plants are going to move in. Or you have a fire and you don't have trees anymore, or all the trees are felled in a storm. There's going to be seed bank in the soil, and temporarily, until the trees grow back, which could take 100 years, you're going to have grasses and forbs, flowering plants. We also have some permanent grasslands in areas that are very wet or very rocky and dry. So areas that are very wet are sort of bogs, or areas that are very rocky and dry, maybe the tops of mountains or rock outcrops. And the vegetation is going to depend on the soil and on the available moisture, but grasses and forbs will predominate. This is a picture of the Pochuck Boardwalk, which is in Vernon, New Jersey. And it is a section of the Appalachian Trail where you suddenly come out of the forest and you walk along this beautiful boardwalk through here and then go back into the forest on the other side. So this is an area that's quite wet. So it's too wet for forest. So it is a permanent grassland. And so this is quite near us. You can go see it. We do have grasslands in our area. So when I'm talking about a perennial border, I think of it as a prairie. Temporary prairies exist in the east. In the west, as you know, in the Midwest, the prairies are more or less permanent because there's not enough rainfall to support trees. In the east, they are temporary because a storm or a fire brings down the trees, creates a sunny opening. The seed bank is there, the seeds are present in the soil, and the grassland species will thrive until tree growth closes the canopy again. And you have a new forest. That takes about 150 years, but you can recreate this effect with a prairie garden. And these are two pictures of exactly the same spot in my garden taken at the top. This one was taken in June, and this one was taken in September. And they're the same spot, same plants, same year, same corner of one of my prairie gardens, which is surrounded by a patio. And full south, our backyard, the back of our house faced full south, so we had absolutely no shade. We just had lawn, and you can see that this is planted quite thickly, and you have great variety throughout the growing season. I didn't plant anything between this and this, and these plants have been in place for between 20 and 30 years. And yes, I do dig out the pokeweed, and I do dig out woody growth that appears, and I do take out some weeds in the spring, although you're not really going to see very many weeds under here. And I do move plants around if I suddenly find I have a bare spot. But for the main, these simply have been in place for a long time, and there's not really a lot to do to them except in the early spring. I just want to show you very few of the variety of native plants. My particular favorite grass is little bluestem. So this is little bluestem in June. It's just pushing up amongst these other plants. And this is little bluestem when it is in seed in September. It's glorious. This is panic grass, which is quite tall, 5 feet tall. This is pink muley grass. This is a really beautiful thing. It's just become widely available. I never saw it being sold even by specialty dealers until the last 2 or 3 years, and I've planted it, and it's really gorgeous. This is prairie drop seed, which forms a beautiful fountain shape. So they have different shapes, they have different colors in the fall, they have different heights, and you use them in different ways. But in nature, our flowering perennials and grasses always grow together, and their root systems are complementary. They support each other, And if you're like your tall perennial sunflowers or anything that's really tall and that tends to flop, if you surround it with native grasses, it won't flop because that's how they grow in nature. They grow together. Some easy to grow native forbs or flowering plants, just very few. There are so many. Again, this is little blue stem in June, and with it is orange butterfly weed and yellow sundrops. A lot of these are the plants that I consider to be just super easy to grow and indomitable in a way. The only place I've ever seen sundrops, this is Onithera fruticosa. The only place I've ever seen it growing in nature is between clefts in the rocks along the seashore in Maine. So that's how tough it is. A lot of these plants want poor soil. You don't want to put little blue stem in nice rich loam. It won't do well. It wants to be in really poor soil, and then 10 years later you're going to have good soil there because it will have created it. New England asters, very important plant for migrating butterflies. This is one of the Rudbeckias. This is actually my favorite. This is Rudbeckia trilobum. And it is, most of the Rudbeckias are biennials. This one is a short-lived perennial, and the flowers are very small, but there are gazillions of them, and I just think they're cute. And this blooms pretty much through late July, August, and September. They live for about 3, 4, 5 years, but then they self-seed all over the place. So even though I haven't replanted them in a long time, I've always got them. Again, some more easy to grow plants. For sun, this is Penstemon digitalis, which blooms. It's one of the first of these sun-loving perennials to bloom. Nothing eats it. It's very, very floriferous. Some of them, there are red-leaf varieties. There's a red-leaf cultivar, but you don't need to do that because you don't need to buy it because the red-leaf varieties actually pop up on their own. I didn't buy them, but I've got them all over the place. And in here, this might be coreopsis, or it might be sundrops again, but there's a lot of penstemon in here. And I think down here is columbine. This is one of the mints. Mints are extremely important plant family. This one is Anis hyssop. What is the Latin name is not coming to me, but this blooms for a very, very long time. And all of the mints are fantastic at attracting pollinators. And for the most part, nothing eats them. Although when deer are hungry in spring, if you've had a bad winter, and in early spring, when some plants start to emerge, they'll pretty much eat anything. This is a goldenrod. And this is one, I think this might even be Canada goldenrod, which simply came up on its own in my garden. And even though it has some thug-like qualities, it does spread. It's shallow rooted, so it's pretty easy to pull. You want to have goldenrod and asters and grasses growing together. If you find a sunny spot in nature in August or September, you will always find them growing together. That's just, it's a plant community, and it just always happens that way. So these are just a very few of the plants that you can grow in a sunny garden to create a prairie. And these are all, as I said, very easy to grow. Care of a prairie garden. You want to pick a sunny site. You want to choose plants that are right for your site and that are native to your area. You do not want to amend the soil. The plants make the soil they want, not vice versa. Don't amend the soil. I do advise people, particularly if they are not particularly experienced gardeners, to start with small plants or plugs, not seed. Most native plants can take 2 years and some 3 years to bloom from seed. And the weeds outcompete them in the meantime. The whole first year, they're making massive root systems. These plants have enormous root systems. The whole first year, a milkweed is going to be that big. at the end of the first year, it's got a big root system. But in the meantime, all the weeds around it will have shaded it out. So you don't want to just scatter seeds. That's not how you create a prairie. If you work with a very experienced person who knows how to create a prairie, you can do it, but you're still going to have a lot of weeding and a lot of work on your hands. You want to start with small plants or plugs, and that is what native plant suppliers supply. You don't want to start with great big plants. You're wasting your money. You want to water during dry periods for that first growing season, but never after that. It will never need water after that. You don't want to remove any dead material until new growth appears the following spring, because this is your habitat for the winter. And you want to clean up in spring, but not too carefully. Let me just go back to that for a second. It's really, really important to leave the growth in the winter. It doesn't look pretty to us, but it's very, very pretty to birds, because there's lots and lots of insects in there and lots of seed, even when we can't see it anymore. So I find that I don't put up bird feeders, and I find that I have just scads of birds in my gardens all through the winter. What I get are these wonderful mixed species foraging flocks, where the small birds come through in mixed species flocks together, and they feed at different levels. But I just have them all the time, and it's because I don't clean up. Okay, the next kind of ecosystem that I want to talk about is a red maple swamp. This particular picture was taken in a beautiful area right here. I live in Glen Rock in Bergen County. We have an area called the Tilke Arboretum, and it was originally a red maple swamp, and some parts of it have been planted, and in some cases, unfortunately so. There is a center section that is beautiful native red maple swamp. So these plants that you're seeing here, it's not hosta. This is skunk cabbage, and there's ferns, and it's just, anyway, it's a really, really, really beautiful red maple swamp, and I've been a volunteer there for many years. A red maple swamp, actually, I can't see the top of that because it's being covered up, but a swamp is a forested wetland. There are many different kinds of wetlands, but in particular, a swamp is a wetland that has trees. Red maple swamps they're very widespread. They're not only here in Bergen County. They occur in poorly drained, low-lying areas, usually with sandy soil. The red maple may be the only dominant tree, or it may be co-dominant with ash or elm or birch. You will also usually see black gum, Nyssa sylvatica, sweet gum, and swamp white oak through the area. The shrub layer will be very dense. The herbaceous layer will often be dominated by ferns, but you're probably going to see skunk cabbage. And there will be vines, including poison ivy, Virginia creeper, and wild grape, that knit the areas together. It's a very, very beautiful, very dense native ecosystem, a red maple swamp. Some of the common shrubs are, this is spice bush up here, high bush blueberries, clethra, and this is actually the indicator. No, this is not it. This is arrowwood viburnum. This particular one is arrowwood viburnum. There is another viburnum that is an indicator plant of this, and that is, okay, just some ground cover plants that you may see before we get to that. This is skunk cabbage in very early spring, and then this is skunk cabbage probably a month later. These are the ferns in the, this is probably a cinnamon fern, but all the ferns in that genus are going to be dominant there. You have, I'm sorry about that. Impatient, it's winter, and the names are not coming to me as quickly as they do in the summer when I'm working with plants all the time. This is our native impatiens. This is Canada Mayflower. And of course, Jack in the Pulpit. There are many, many other plants that are common to red maple swamps. These are just a few of them. And though you may be asking yourself, how do I create a forest? The pictures that I was just showing you are from an existing forest that happily has not been cut down. So how do you create a forest? Suppose you have a lawn. How do you create a forest out of it? And the forest that you're looking at on the left is, again, this is my backyard, and it was a lawn. It was certainly 30 years ago, it was a lawn and nothing but lawn. If the trees are present, there were no trees present here. There was one crabapple that has since died. It was right over here. So probably when we put in the patio, that gave it its final blow. And then there was one very sick flowering dogwood over here, but that was it. Otherwise it was lawn. If the trees are present, leave your leaves in the fall and create a nice thick layer. This helps to retain moisture. It promotes soil health. It welcomes insects. And of course, it's also going to provide a seed bank. There's going to be seeds in there. Fence off an area and don't mow it. Plants will appear. Identify them and encourage them or cull them as necessary. Add appropriate species of native understory trees and shrubs and ground cover. We planted this with very tiny bare root plants. They were no more than a foot high. We had to stop mowing when we planted it. It's not a huge area. We've got a little more than a quarter acre. Nobody has a really big plot here in this area, but it was, and we had to stop mowing because they were so small. Now we have weed laws in our town that if the grass grows longer than 12 inches, they come and they fine you. So what we did was we told our neighbors what we were doing so they wouldn't report us, and they didn't, because the grass obviously was going to grow taller than those little tiny whips, and we couldn't mow because there were so many of them and they were tiny. We would have just mowed them all down. So what happened was the grass grew up because of course there was no shade, and a few native wildflowers appeared. Some biennial rudbeckia appeared, but over time, as the woody plants grew, it shaded out the grasses and the other plants, and now there's just the understory is mostly weeds. I have to admit, I have a battle with that barren strawberry that's all over the place now, and I also have to weed it carefully because my neighbors, of course, have Norway maples, so those come up all over the place. But I also do have seedlings of the trees that I planted, and I have a native holly against the back of my house that was there before we bought the house. And I've got holly seedlings in there, but it took quite a long time for them to appear, but I have them now. So you want to fence off the area in some way and don't mow it. Plants are going to appear. You can add appropriate species of native understory trees and shrubs and ground cover. If no trees are present, or if you want more, you want to plant small bare root shrubs and trees, fence off the area, and don't mow. And again, as I said, if you have weed laws, you may have to, I don't know, inform somebody so that you don't get a summons. You're going to add or subtract as necessary as the forest grows. This is just about 30 years that this since we did that, and it looks like it was always there. But it certainly didn't look like that for the first couple of years. So that's how you create a forest. I also want to talk about, we talked about wetland forest, the red maple forest, and I want to talk about an upland forest, a drier forest, an oak-hickory forest, which is quite predominant here in northern New Jersey. So this is an upland forest dominated by nut-bearing trees. It is similar to many other mixed hardwood forests, and you identify it by the codominance of oaks and hickories. The same way as you would identify a red maple swamp by certain indicator plants. There always are. If you look at a good field guide, you're going to know what the indicator plants are for different types of forests. On dry sites, you will probably only have oaks and hickories. On moister sites, you'll have a more varied selection of trees. It tends to occur on well-drained soil, usually sandy soil. We tend to have sandy soil up here in the north. It tends to occur on ridge tops, on upper slopes and on south and west facing slopes. And the presence of maple leaf viburnum in the understory is an indicator of this particular type of forest. So just to look at some of the understory trees and shrubs that you might expect to see. This is flowering dogwood. And most people like to plant flowering dogwood out in the middle of their lawn, and it's beautiful. But flowering dogwood is an understory tree that doesn't like full sun, and it will invariably get diseases if you plant it out in the sun, and then you're going to wonder why. Don't plant it in the sun and it'll be fine. This is what it looks like in nature growing under trees. It's quite sparse. It doesn't look like those real full ones that we're used to seeing. This is mountain laurel. Again, it tends to occur on slightly drier slopes, and it's a great shade plant. We very often use it as a foundation plant because it does well in shade. This is maple leaf viburnum, and this is our indicator plant. It is a smaller viburnum. It looks like this in spring, in May when it blooms, and it looks like this in fall. And I have to say, there are two native plants that I think have the most gorgeous fall color. And this is one of them. It tends to get this pink purple color in fall, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. The other one that I think its fall color is to die for is our tupelo or black gum, Nyssa sylvatica, which tends to have brilliant red leaves in fall. You're not going to find a tupelo in this kind of forest, but it tends to need a wetter site. But anyway, this is your indicator plant of this type of forest. Ground cover plants of oak-hickory forests, and I probably shouldn't say common when I'm talking about lady slippers, but this is the kind of ecosystem in which they grow. There are many, many plants that grow in a forest like this, even though it's fairly dry. This is oh my God, they're not gonna. This is sarsaparilla. This is the common name. It was going to have fantastic bright blueberries in fall. False Solomon seal. I'm sorry. One of the many anemones that we get. The partridge berry. Canada. You know, they're not coming to me. I haven't looked at this in a while, and it's definitely not spring. I haven't looked at spring plants in a while. The names are not coming to me, but Bobby or Mike might be able to, I'm sure they can fill everything in for you, all the plants that you're looking at. But these are just a few of the most common plants that you will see on the forest floor of an intact forest. This is some resources about plant communities. There are lots of good resources that you can go to if you want to know more about plant communities. There are field guides, and the one that I like, because it's not technical, but it's just a really good, really readable book about which plants go together in nature and what will happen if you stop mowing, how you'll get forest succession, things like that. The Peterson Guide to Eastern Forests. It's one of the books in the Peterson Field Guide series, and I think it is an excellent guide to forest types in particular. It has color plates about all the different forest types, because I'm just showing you two. There are many. The EPA has files by state and region, and that was that map that I was showing you at the beginning. It will show you the plant communities that are around where you are living. There's a very, very good book called Plant Communities of New Jersey by Collins and Anderson. It describes the different communities. We are very close to New York State. We share a great deal of our ecology with them. So New York has done some really good stuff on how to find this. And there is, right now, there is a database of plant ecology, and that is still under construction, but there's some useful information there. Should I keep this slide I can, you know what I'm going to do is people find this slide, these resource slides very useful. I think Mike is going to put a lot of these in the chat, but if you need more time while we're doing the questions, I'll go back to these slides and put them up again. These are resources about native plants and their habitats. The Native Plant Society of New Jersey, I would hope, would be a great resource to most of you. Jersey Friendly Yards, which tends to focus a bit on the southern part of the state, is a terrific resource. For pollinator gardens, in other words, if you want to know what to plant in a native pollinator garden, really good resources are the Xerces Society or NABA, which is the North American Butterfly Association. They have lists of plants for each region of the country that are excellent. If you want a bird-friendly garden, and this all goes together, because if you want birds, you need native plants because you need the insects that eat them, because the birds need the insects. So for information about bird-friendly gardens and how to create them, the Bergen County Audubon Society in particular is excellent. They really, really do focus on native plants. They have a lot of activities focusing on it, and they certify wildlife gardens. And they make it kind of easy for you. So I would join Bergen Audubon and go to their activities, and it's really a good. We very often, our Bergen-Passaic chapter very often attends. We've had joint meetings with them, and when they have a one-day event, we'll go and we'll take a table and give out information, because it's just so complementary what they do and what we do. So I would highly recommend Bergen Audubon if you're at all in the northern part of the state. There are some very good books these days: Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Last Hope by Doug Tallamy, and also, of course, his last book, The Nature of Oaks. All excellent books about why you should be planting native plants. There are a few great places to search if you want to know exactly what plants to start to grow. If you want to start to develop a list of plants, there is a searchable database at wildflower.org, which is the website of the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center at the University of Texas. You can search it if you want a shrub that's under 6 feet that wants full shade and dry soil and is native to New Jersey. You can search for that. You can search for anything you can think of. It's an excellent resource to use to develop a list of plants. Jersey Friendly Yards also has a very good database for, it's not as extensive, but it's an excellent way to start to develop a preliminary list of plants. And Jersey Friendly Yards has a couple of model gardens. The Wild Ones website. Wild Ones is another really interesting organization, and we have a new chapter up here in northern New Jersey. It's called the Gateway chapter, referring to the gateway, the New York Harbor, which is a gateway. But they have a selection of professional designs that you can find for native gardens. Let me see, I can't remember what else I've got. Okay, that is the last slide. So while I'm taking questions, if there are questions, I will leave this up, and I also go back to the slide before this for a while if people want those resources. But Mike was going to put a lot of this in the chat.
Hello, Elaine. Awesome.
You're still here. Good.
I'm still here, wide awake, jotting like crazy. So Eastern Wahoo, someone says they're getting conflicting information on the kind of sun it needs.
Hearts are busting. Yeah. Isn't that another common name for it? It's our native euonymus.
Yes,
this plant,
yes.
I have found the deer adore. This has, in my garden at any rate, the mothers must tell the children, because, oh my God, it disappears. So I have to fence it. I have got it in part shade. And again, my site is dry, but I'm not having any trouble with it. But I find that I have to protect it from deer. I haven't seen those wonderful fruits yet. I'm hoping to. I've had it in place about 2 years. So as far as I know, part shade, and it would probably either needs dry soil or it would not be fussy, because it's doing well here. I'm sitting on, you can actually look at the maps and the website of the US Geological Survey and find out what you're sitting on. I'm sitting on 80 feet of sand. So I have great drainage, but you can find that out about your, I generally don't mention that because it gets too technical, but if you go to the website of the US Geological Survey and kind of search through, you can find exactly geologically what you're sitting on top of. So, which is kind of interesting. So it grows well for me. The main thing, I mean, I would just look it up. I frankly, I don't know any more than that. It does want part shade and that it doesn't seem to be fussy.
Yeah, and I would just add, living in South Jersey, that the red maple swamp is also fairly common down here too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So for those of you who were thinking, oh, maybe this is North Jersey communities, it also is very common here.
Thank you.
The problem
Thank you
is
for that, yeah.
the problem is the understory, because of our deer population, does not look like it might if there weren't an overabundance of deer.
There are very few places where it looks like the pictures that I showed you. We have terrible deer pressure up here too. In the town where I live in, they walk down Main Street. I mean, right down the center of me.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Amazing. So here, I'm going to try to go through these quickly because I have lots of questions. Should we pull out black walnut when it seeds around?
Well, black walnut is native. So I would try to develop the community that it wants. If you want it, look up what it grows with in nature, and that's going to tell you what will grow around it. Because it doesn't kill everything in its path, you know, by no means. What this question is referring to is the fact that this plant has some allelopathic properties. It is poisonous to some of the plants around it, but it's not poisonous to everything. So do a little bit of research and find out what lives with it in nature. And if you want it, by all means, keep it and then plant those plants. That's what I would do.
And a couple questions about creating. Oh my gosh, my dog. Sorry. A couple questions about creating forests. How close should you put the plants together if you're planting young plants? How long do you not know if you're letting the seedlings grow?
Yeah, well, we just marked it off. I think we marked it off with dead logs or something and stopped mowing. And as I said, we told every neighbor who could see it what we were doing and explained that it wouldn't look messy forever. Because you should search to see if you have weed laws before you start with tiny plants that you're going to have to let the grass grow them on. In terms of spacing, I tend to plant too close, but obviously what's going to happen is, like, we planted our canopy trees were less than 3 feet tall when we planted them. Now they're 30, 40 feet tall, and we certainly planted things too close to them. There's no, but you can cull later on, you can move things later on. I like things to fill in quickly, so I tend to plant a little too close. I can't give you a rule of thumb because I don't know what you want it to look like.
So a couple of mountain laurel questions. One is, my mountain laurel has black spots and yellow leaves. Is it too wet? And another is, does mountain laurel like deep shade?
It can take quite a bit of shade. I have it planted, and it was planted before we moved here. I have it planted on the north side of my house, so it gets almost no sun. The black spot, there are lots of different black spots. It's probably a virus, and it's probably unsightly but harmless. What mountain laurel, they don't want to be too wet. Certainly not. Well, I'm sorry, what was the other part of that question? It was black spot and something else?
And deep shade.
Yeah, they can take deep shade. Yeah, the only time these plants get any sun is in, like, the very height of summer, when the sun is high enough, so it's coming down onto, above the house and on the north side of the house. So and they do fine. They're probably almost as old as my house, and they're doing fine. If the soil, and for foundation plants, the soil is probably not acidic enough for mountain laurel. They do need acidic soil, and my soil tends to be circumneutral and, around pH 7. So about once every 2 or 3 years, I put down, what is it called? It's hollytone. I put down
Mm.
hollytone maybe at half the recommended rate. That's all you need. You never want to put anything down, at the recommended rate, and you never want to do it as often as they tell you you need it.
Yeah.
You can, and certainly you could test the pH of the soil, but if the leaves are yellow, that's probably, the soil is probably not acidic enough.
Okay. Ground nuts. I don't think you talked about that. Are they good? Ground nuts? Are they good?
I'm not sure what plant you're referring to. Do you know, Bobby?
I don't have a genus and species here, so
I'm sorry, but I don't know what you're talking about. So
and then ground hogs. Will mint survive ground hogs?
yeah, I have a lot of groundhogs. I got them all over the place, and they don't seem to eat that for the most part. Yeah, although as I said, in early spring, if it's been a hard winter and they do, like bergamot or monarda tends to emerge early, they'll eat that because they're looking for anything green in early spring, but then they'll tend to leave it alone afterwards.
Okay.
And it will recover. It's always going to put out more growth. It's the only time I found the mints getting eaten. We had a really hard winter where we had snow on the ground, deep snow on the ground for most of the winter. Maybe that was 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
And in the spring, as stuff emerged, even the milkweed got eaten as it emerged, but it all came back.
Yeah.
It's always going to just come back again. The roots are there. It's going to keep making growth. But yeah, stuff got eaten that I certainly never expected would get eaten.
Thank you to the wonderful people in chat. Apios americana.
Oh yes, and I know what that is. I have seen that. Yes, I'm sorry about that. The only place I've seen that growing in the wild, we can go back to the question if you want. The only place I've seen it growing in the wild is, for many years we've gone to a particular place in Maine and stayed on a lovely pond where most of the forest is pretty pristine. It's wonderful, and it grows along the pond shore. So my guess is that it needs a wet site. So that's right. And in other words, full sun and wet feet is where I've seen it grow. So if you want to go back to what the question was, thank you for reminding me what it is.
So
it's in the pea family. It's in the pea family, and it has beautiful purple flowers. Yeah.
And they like the streams, according to somebody in chat. Powdery mildew and monarda. A way to stop that?
I ignore it.
Okay.
It's the way I look at it is that it's purely cosmetic.
Yep.
And I simply ignore it. You can, people say baking soda and all that stuff, but almost anything you do is going to change the pH of the soil. And if the plants are healthy, I don't want to do that.
Right.
So so I have to admit I do nothing for powdery mildew.
Okay, we're going to take a couple more. I know people really want their questions answered, but I'm going to go. What are indomitable plants for clay?
Indomitable, yes.
Indomitable. Thank you.
Okay, I do not have clay. So I cannot, off the top of my head, I don't know. But what I would do is I would look at the plants that grow in clay ecosystems. We tend, as far as I know, and somebody was telling me recently that I'm totally wrong, so I could be totally wrong. But from what I learned in horticulture school, we really don't have much clay. Certainly there's a doggy. Certainly in northern.
Keep it quiet.
I don't know if you remember, but one time I was giving a talk for the, I think for the spring conference, and I had closed my door and my dog started scratching on the door and I had to get up and let him in, giving, in the middle of the talk. So, you do what you have to do.
Hopefully they're dog and cat lovers. One more.
So I was going to say, I would look up the plants that grow in ecosystems that are dominated by clay. That's what I would do. I would start with a Google search. I would look, I would just research. I really don't know offhand about plants, about indomitable plants for clay.
And then my last question, because it's getting very late here. It's the PR question, Elaine. When the neighbors, how do you respond to the person who says, the birds love it, the butterflies love it, and it's Buddleia or another invasive plant? How do you say maybe not such a great idea to plant that, there are alternatives.
I tried to explain this what I like to do, and I give another talk where this is part of it, but everybody knows that monarch butterflies can only eat milkweed. I think most people know that, the caterpillars can only eat plants in that one genus. I think most people know that. They're very particular. No monarchs, no milkweed, no monarchs. People tend to know that. What people don't know is that every butterfly is that particular. So you may be feeding the adult butterflies, but you are not feeding the caterpillars. So you're not going to have any more butterflies. One thing that when I first started gardening, I put in a buddleia, and I didn't know. And I also put in some asters, and I watched the butterflies fly right past the buddleia to the asters. Mm-hmm. And you don't need any better reason. I mean, that was the adults. You don't need any better reason to take out a buddleia than to see that. But no, really, the thing about native plants is that they cannot feed the whole life cycle. They can feed some adults, but they cannot feed the caterpillars. They also can't feed the birds because the birds need the caterpillars. Something like 97% of baby birds' diet is caterpillars.
Yes.
So you need to plant these native plants that host a lot of Lepidoptera species, moths and butterflies. And among flowering plants, that's asters and anything in the aster family, which is a huge family, the composites. So asters and goldenrod and sunflowers and all those, they host a lot of butterfly species, and also native grasses host a lot of butterfly species. The skippers, which are a very big family, they eat the native grasses. So you want to plant grasses. And of course, there's the violets and the fritillaries. Don't take those violets out of your lawn. Let them be there. You're going to have butterflies. But I would try to explain that if there are no native plants, there will not be butterflies anymore. They cannot reproduce. Basically, they need native plants to reproduce.
And in turn, birds, right?
Yeah, and you're not going to have birds. As I said, I don't put out feeders, and we get phenomenal bird activity here just because of the native plants. In the winter, they're feeding all through the plants, and in the summer, they're eating insects.
Right. Well, I want to thank you, Elaine. It was wonderful, wonderful presentation. You have tons of kudos here. And everybody's very, very appreciative of all the information that you've provided. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight. It was a great evening and a great way to kick off 2023. Come back in February for Steve Kudos and look for more information on the annual meeting in March.
Steve is a terrific speaker. He was my teacher at the New York Botanical Garden.
Yes.
He's a great speaker, really interesting, really enthusiastic. And I would, again, I know you said this, but everybody, please join the Native Plant Society of New Jersey. So
fantastic. And this was recorded. I might have missed the beginning part of it, but you get the meat of it. And I know that Mike will be helping us get that posted in the next week.
Thank you very much, everybody. This was a pleasure to do.
And thank you, Elaine. And we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.